In this 6-episode series, we explore the transformative potential of survivor engagement in anti-trafficking work. Each episode features an expert in the field, and together we'll dive into key topics, provide insights, best practices, and inspiration for advancing meaningful survivor participation. In this episode, I'm happy to introduce Reverend Dr. Carrie Pemberton Ford, founder and director of the Cambridge Center of Applied Research in Human Trafficking and member of the VoiceOver Project Advisory Board. Carrie will speak about the ethical challenges of securing survivor voices. Thank you, Carrie.
Oh, and Sylvia, thank you very much for inviting me to address this, and welcome everybody to this talk as part of the series on how we approach the opportunities that increasing representation of survivor voice within the anti-trafficking field offers and presents for us all. You'll see that the challenge here for today is the ethical challenge of securing survivor voice. I come to this piece of the webinar from my work as an ethicist at the University of Cambridge. Devised recently a thing called the trust matrix, which I think actually is very pertinent to this field of work, as well as the work of over 15 years now, directing the Cambridge Centre of Applied Research in Human Trafficking, which works out of Cambridge. Here's the sort of agenda for what we're going to look at briefly today. I'm just going to glance on them, but you can come back to it to reflect on more issues arising from when you start putting a bit of an ethical lens on it. What have ethics got to do with this, and where are we deriving our ethical mandate from? And you'll see that I put political energy tied in with an ethical mandate, because I do think that getting your ethics clear on this does help you focus your political energy for the direction of travel. I'm going to briefly have a scope around where we've got to since 2000 and the initial announcement of the Palermo Protocol, which sort of set the scene for the 21st century, and how states were being asked to respond to trafficking, and how, of course, then the NGOs clustered around to ensure that some of those bigger questions around the Palermo Protocol, around its 4 Ps, needed to be addressed, particularly those of protection and prevention. International conversations around rights and responsibilities, which just keeps wandering around, being iterated around the human rights discourses, that rights pertain alongside responsibilities. The rise of survivor engagement as an ought to do within both the NGO sector, but now increasingly within IGO sectors, and that will move down across into many state operations. What are the political and systems realities confronting survivor voice inclusion? This is a key one, because our ethics comes up against what systems are really pushing out at the moment in terms of survivor voice inclusion challenges, and the different modelling of survivor voice incorporation, which I hope you might take away as a think through for your own organisations, or for work that you intend to do going forward from this voice over interjection, and some next steps on the road less travelled. So that's where we're going to in this brief time together. Now, you know, people use ethics and refer to ethics without spending much time clarifying what it is, and how it can assist us. And of course, you know, we could all sit MAs and spend a year discussing the range of challenges and analysis around ethics. But let's say that ethics is a system of moral principles. And they affect how people in societies make decisions and lead their lives. And ethics shift across cultures and contexts and generations. However, there seems to be some themes that connect intergenerationally and across time around what is good for societies and what is good for individuals. And when you've got that sort of virtuous circle operating, good for individuals and good for society, we can start describing something as a moral philosophy which has impact for the societies that people live in and pertain to how individuals may choose to align to the morals of the communities in which they live. Now, derived from the Greek word ethos, it does flag the importance of custom, habit, character, and disposition. And it's important in a secular age that ethics becomes an area, yes, that's debated and contested, but we need to actually, rather like values, be able to describe what those ethics are for one another so that we get some alignment in what we undertake. And I guess in our contemporary northern economies, Western age, internationally from the northern and western hierarchies, the UDHR has been announced really as our ethical go-to. Now, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was finally put together in 1948, and what it claims to do is, and actually does in so many spheres, is establish common rights and freedoms for all human beings in a single point of history. And what was this single point of history that drove this big this big dream of a unifying ethic? And it was, of course, after the most horrific genocide of Jewish people, some 6 million persons within the Jewish communities, and what's often forgotten, 5 million of those deemed as undesirable by the Nazi regime that was then currently destroying the civilized status quo that had been generated in Europe. And they expunged, destroyed, killed, murdered people due to genetic, cultural origins, sexual origins, race, and indeed some for health conditions. Absolutely horrendous time in our recent history, just in the previous millennium. And so into the statute books comes this Universal Declaration of Human Rights through the International Bill of Human Rights, finally completed in 1966 and into force in 1976. Now, all the UN signatories, 197 of them, are signed up to at least one of the outcome pieces of this legislation. And inside that was developed enough cooperation to see human rights and human trafficking put together as part of the same process of organizing our approach to human trafficking with a real pinion point arising from the Declaration of Human Rights and the Bill of Human Rights. And you'll so find inside discussions around Palermo this discussion around, well, which human rights are being contravened when we look at human trafficking, and what human rights are being contravened as we look to the responses of states, of governments, of policing forces, and indeed of some of those actors working within the NGO framework, which undermine the human rights of those who have been trafficked. And it's partly to respond to that you see the national referral mechanism apparatus starting to pinion back to essential human rights that should be protected and asserted and put more into focus in the response of states to human trafficking as it continues to diversify in terms of its manifestation. So the key rights that are contravened by human trafficking, well, you'll find them as multiple, but I've just, for the purposes of this webinar, looked at around 8 of them for the key rights contravened. There are, of course, others, which you will note as you open up the Bill of Human Rights to have a further explore of it. And indeed, some of the publications that came out of the Palermo Plus 20 publications, which looked at human rights and trafficking. Freedom of movement, freedom of association, freedom from slavery, the right to meaningful and just employment. That's one that's very key, especially for those people who have found themselves the wrong end of migration law and being looked at as those who can be returned to their countries of origin. That right to meaningful and just employment is really exceptionally important. The right to liberty and security, the right to be free from gendered violence, and the right to an adequate standard of living. And you'll be thinking as you reflect on this, how we drop under some of these standards that we say are key rights in the Bill of Human Rights. And human trafficking, becoming a victim of human trafficking, doesn't just negate those in the process of being trafficked, but can linger the other side of being trafficked. And this is why Survivor Voice is exceptionally important, because it announces to states, it announces to the communities in which people are living that these rights are being consistently violated post the trafficking experience. And what we do about it is part of the political challenge that arises from the ethical challenge of the contravention of their rights. Palermo Plus 20, that booklet publication I showed you in the previous slide, mentions that the convention is not a silver bullet, but there is a need for greater cooperation across states and across organisations in securing the ongoing rights of those who've been trafficked. Organised crime is more of a challenge to the world than terrorism. And why is that not clarified in our political discourse? That the uptick of the Sustainable Development Goals alerts to other forces which are operating on making people both vulnerable to trafficking and the ongoing vulnerability of those who've been trafficked post-trafficking, and the requirement for a major review of the COP process in terms of the environmental and ecological challenge that faces the world. It's not just global warming that needs to be looked at in terms of fuel emissions, etc. But there need to be perhaps added into the whole COP process appropriate refugee and migration protections, which are not currently well enough focused. Throughout it all, we need to be looking at victim-centred approaches, and we can talk about the language we use around those who've been trafficked. That's part of the ethics too, which need to be really clarified and made the point of departure for all work addressing trafficking. So if we look at the 4 pillars of the national referral mechanism, you saw the very hefty publication that the OSCE created for looking at the NRMs, is identification plus protection, individual support and access to services. You can read this slide along with me. Access to criminal justice redress, medical and health service, long-term commitment for traumatized and trafficked persons. But, you know, actually a key element that I think unlocks everything else is this matter of social inclusion. Because if you're going to properly socially include those who've been trafficked and not ostracize them or exclude them because they've somehow crossed a line, had that line crossed by being trafficked, that they somehow are moved into a set beyond the included, politically entitled communities inside our communities. And part of that, of course, is the challenge of those who've been trafficked across borders and therefore lose their entitlements to their state processes as voters, as access to all sorts of societal rights, because they are living in communities where they are not deemed to have that entitlement. This is a key area, I think, that giving survivors voice to be able to announce appropriately to not only the processes of law enforcement, which is where it really originally derived its energy, but now to go actually to announce their presence and their requirements for social inclusion and what all that entails to the political systems, to the organizational wings of governance at every level, as well as to be properly supported by those who are non-governmental organisations. It's about pushing the voice back up and through into government as well. So, you know, in the 2020s, in systems theory, we've been exposed to all sorts of theories around complexity and intersectionality, and this has, in its term, as academics get involved in the whole counter-trafficking arena, brought its theories and its insights into trafficking. And I'm going to just encompass this by talking about the challenge of heterogeneity. And here's, if you look at these 8 different types of human trafficking, which belonged to one of the graphics for the UN Office on Drugs and Crime a couple of years back, this was seen as bringing levels of complexity to the trafficking debate. I have to say that we know that from as those who work in the counter-trafficking arena, the complexity gets even wider now with the online impact of how trafficking is mediated and indeed in a good percentage of cases actually performed. And if we add into that this little some reel we've got here, the different countries, the different ethnicities, the different generations, and the reality of men, women, boys, girls, and transgender being involved as those who've been trafficked, then you can see that the level of complexity starts to build very rapidly indeed. No homogeneous one-size-fits-all answers to those who find themselves the other side of having been trafficked. So how do we manage survivor voice in this environment of complexity? I've just had a little play with a Venn diagram here on how survivor voice fits within the wider interstate and state interaction with trafficked persons. And you see at the top here, I've put the monetary resource that is required at every level for the addressing of the challenges that have impacted those who have been impacted and survived trafficking criminality. Now, some of that resource goes into non-governmental sector, civil society through the national referral mechanism, and this is devolved support, which is currently seen as the best way of managing survivor support once somebody has been referred into the NRM process, once somebody has been discovered by whether it's policing or enforcement or border screening as having been trafficked into a particular country or within a particular country. More resource also goes into, and the size of these little Venn pieces are not correlated to the budget. I haven't done that audit on terms of size of the budget, but let's go that I think the CJS gets a bigger chunk of the pie really than the non-governmental sector, but I'm not hanging my hat on either of these. Just to say they are substantial areas of government resource, energy, time that is given into the CJS through courts, tribunals, police response, investigations, lawyers, border and immigration personnel. I could go on. Now, these then feed into survivor voice. But survivor voice is not at the moment perhaps sufficiently speaking into how the money and the resource is being deployed and the length of time that survivorship takes to actually move into fuller integration into the social integration we looked at a couple of slides before. So this is an ethical question to be addressed by all those within the counter-trafficking field, whether you're from the state sector, from the NGO sector, or those working as conglomerations or associations of survivors. And so this raises a question, and it's one that's been affecting us inside the voiceover project. We've spent many hours actually as the advisory board chewing over the different models that we're coming across as we look at how to develop survivor voice within both critically within the NGO environment, but also actually within the IGO environment and state political processes. Because, as I said, as we started this reflection, our ethics helps drive our political energy and our political focus. And political focus has a governmental, clear governmental dimension to it, as well as those who seek to rest their political efforts inside NGOs. In the end, NGOs have to grab the state resource to be able to deliver the services they think are the most appropriate, and the most impactful NGOs frequently are able to adjust and alter both government perception and government policy and government resourcing of counter-trafficking and survivor voice integration efforts. So here is a model, three models that I've just popped out here for us to have a reflect on, visualize on, of the different ways in which survivor voice is captured, if you like, within NGO, IGO activity. If I look first of all, actually right to left, and go and look at the reference group that was developed inside the OSCE. Well, you've got the central hub of the OSCE, and then you've got lots of little satellite activities that inform the OSCE, wider OSCE tasks and interests. And inside that, each one, you see that they will be subdivided, whether it's businesses and governments external to the OSCE, NGOs, law enforcement, civil society. They all reply to the central hub of the OSCE and inform their onward activities. And the survivor voice piece almost sits as a isolated planet within that oscillating universe. There are all sorts of interesting repercussions have happened around survivor voice with the OSCE, and I don't want to really spend too much time here on this, but some of the issues that arose, of course, was that there was a sense that the survivor voice was being used in a instrumental and somewhat transactional manner, not benefiting from a professionalization, if you like, of that expertise that was being offered in through people who represented survivors to the central hub of the OSCE. More work needs to be done on that as the dust settles on the politics and the noise that gathered around that impetus by the OSCE to say, we think we should have a lot more input from survivors. But how do you do it in a way that properly recognises the rights of survivors and their the requirement really for that voice to be properly appreciated and not exploited for the needs of either looking good or for saying we've got the representation tick. And let's go to the middle illustration here, and I think I would like to pose that this is a model that many NGOs who are working with survivor voice inputs are currently operating with. And that is that you have the board and the executive, you have the delivery team, and everyone who's carrying a little post-it note here has some sort of connection with a more vigorous survivor team that is operating. However, very few have got presence of those who are survivors in any robust number or robust representative role in a board and executive. And it would be very interesting, I think, to look at and do an audit, in a sense, of how any who are in at board and executive level are actually accountable to the survivor groups that they have been accessing and implementing survivor voice work with. I think most are sitting on the periphery of the NGOs who are working to try and understand how to do survivor voice in an ethically robust as well as sustainable manner. Of course, if you change your constituency, sometimes you need to change. Well, always actually, you need to change something in the central hub of the organisation, and that's going to be a real challenge in this arena. And then we have MIST as an example of an alternative way of doing things, which is to try and build out survivor voice from a survivor voice led in many ways, although there's always within that organisation as well an executive that's bringing the executive skills, the operational administrative skills, and the organisational interaction skills into the enabling of the, if you like, survivor voice union that's being developed into the political space, and being able to operationalize not just the delivery of services to those who are members of that group, but also to change policies and change public opinion and change and really impact media and social media understanding of what trafficking really means from the inside out rather than from the outside looking in. Now, all three of these models may have things to offer on survivor voice manifestation, how you do it. However, I do think that the missed elaboration of this does pose some real challenges, particularly to that middle model that I'm showing you. And again, this is something that we will be taking forward post the voiceover project. And here are just some of my quick reflections on the MIST model. You know, what are some of the challenges involved in governance, professional standards, etc.? How heterogeneous might this model become? or does it privilege a form of self-structured homogeneity? And does this model carry with it an embedded ethical weighting as the best way, the most democratic representation, privileging lived experience? And again, here on the mixed economy, I think it does capture something of our current default survivor leadership model. And how heterogeneous is this model? Does it overprivilege the status quo? I think it may well do. And if that's the case, we need to just be aware that when we're looking at trafficking, we are looking at disrupting the status quo, because trafficking needs to be brought in from the shadows into onto the stage, into the main square, if you like, the main political square of what's happening in our societies. And that means that when you're talking about inclusion, you have to talk about enabling full participation of citizens, that trafficked persons are citizens whose rights have been fundamentally disarmed, and the role of moving people back into social inclusion is about enabling that to happen from within their own communities of survivorship. And does this model carry with it an embedded ethical weighting in terms of privileging professional know-how and system legacy privileging? I think it probably does. And we just need to be aware of that and know how to constantly be relaxing the hard borders between the board and executive delivery team and those who are clients of the system. This model of the OSC experience, these are some of the questions I have on it, and I would welcome engagement around other reflections on this model and whether this model's been captured correctly. There'll be some inside the system who may object and say, no, this isn't quite how that model works. I'm part of the whole importance of ethical conversation is to discuss what we see and how we represent it, so that we can understand it better. So, what is the overall voice-over concern? Well, I think it's that we are looking for increased representation in contemporary counter-trafficking activities. Yes, of course, survivor voice has been there to improve policing outcomes, but that was the dynamic that really drove the first 15 years post Palermo. But I think we need to really up the political energy around what the ethics of having survivor voice means, and what social integration actually requires, that right, for enhanced post-trafficking integration, and indeed post-survivor flourishing. So back to our original agenda. What's ethics got to do with it? What's being derived from our ethical mandate? Where have we got to since 2000 and the Palermo Protocol? International conversations around rights and responsibilities, the rise of the survivor engagement as an ought to do. What are the political and systems realities confronting survivor voice and inclusion? The different modelling of survivor voice and cooperation. I just think it's really helpful for us to try and graphically scope out what we're doing. It stops people it puts it out there between us all, and enables us to think about what actually we are doing and who is being impacted by our decisions and who is being more privileged in what decisions are being made. And then to look at the next steps on the road less travelled. Okay, so thoughts and reflections and next steps. Well, this is what the whole point of the VoiceOver project was, that it was convened to help look at some beta processes of how to improve survivor inclusion and what might be required for across the EU for improving NGO activities in this arena and capabilities in this arena. But I think that what the 2-year program has actually shown is that there is a bit of a lack of clarity around what the full purpose of in increasing survivor voice is, and indeed who are the agents for that enhancement of survivor voice. And if you do enhance survivor voice and empower and put back the power into the hands of those who are survivors, actually the systems that originally decide to do that will have to flex and change and be transformed by these new levels of participation. And are they really ready for that? And that's an ethical challenge. That's why ethics is always so exciting and interesting, because there is a sort of brutality about ethics, or a singularity and objective nature to ethics, in as much as it puts the subjectivity a bit to one side. It tries to put ego to one side, and it tries to raise the common good as the driver that enables us to bring about an enhanced and improved system for everybody, for both individuals and the wider communities in which they're set. And so this is the big vision, if you like, for survivor voice. It's not a hole in the corner sort of activity for some NGOs to be improving and upping their game in. It actually is a beta test in a form of social transformation, which gives those who've been brutalized by failures, in a sense, of our communities to shine a light back into the communities which at one level have failed to protect everybody's rights and put some responsibility back on the communities, as well as entering into their own process of moving the other side of the appalling abuse that they have experienced. So anyway, I look forward to thoughts and reflections coming in from our engagement on this webinar. I hope that it has provoked some helpful thinking for you. And I look forward to, and me, as well as the other members of the advisory board and of those who are part of the whole team that have come together, 5 organisations, 5 NGOs working in this environment, as we come together for our final conference in April. We look forward to responses from these webinars that have been produced to help expand the conversation outside of the privileged group that captured this EU funding for looking at this really important subject for our times. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. And there were so many important and thought-provoking points in your speech. We truly appreciate your perspective. And we think I would like to thank also those who've been watching this episode of the voiceover expert talks on survivor engagement. I also want to remind that this project is founded by the European Union, whose support has made it possible for us to amplify the voices of individuals with lived experience and foster meaningful dialogue on these critical topics. Be sure to check out other episodes and continue to explore ways to empower survival leaders and promote ethical, trauma-informed, and impactful practices. Thank you.